Okay, hello everybody. My name is Andy Holzman. I'm a software developer at Uniface in the Uniface Lab, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about our web integration functionality that we've introduced. We already had a large part of this. We have introduced some new pieces to help us out with interfacing and integrating with REST APIs. So that's what I'm going to focus on. The talk will be mainly about the Uniface aspect. We'll be using OneDrive as an example of a REST API, but I won't be going very deeply into the OneDrive API. I'll be much more focusing on the Uniface capabilities and how to access those APIs. So firstly, we'll have a look at the at what REST is, and we'll have just a brief summary of the Uniface Web capabilities, and then we'll look a bit more closely at using RESTful services. So what is REST? REST stands for Representational State Transfer. Actually, it was coined by a term coined by Roy Fielding, who was one of the designers of HTTP, and he set down a number of guiding principles for the design of HTTP, before they thought of HTTP, they called it representational state transfer. So when we talk about REST, we're talking actually about using standard HTTP methods to gain access to information over the internet. RESTful services are becoming much more popular. And we're moving away from the complexity of the SOAP protocol, so they're definitely worth supporting and looking at. If we look at the Uniface capabilities as to what we have a couple of HTTP clients. One is the HTML widget that you can just build into your forms. It's very good for interactive use. It's not a fully fledged browser, but it does allow you to treat HTML in your application. And of course we have the UHTTP component, which has a number of operations that you can use in proc. On the server side, we have static server pages and dynamic server pages. The static server pages are very simple to use, and that's their attraction. It's quite easy to implement your own REST services using a static server page, a USP. Dynamic server pages are really for full-fledged backends that you for web applications, and I won't be talking about those really at all in this presentation, but for the other three capabilities we'll see those in use. So the first thing to look at, and probably the most important slide in this presentation, is this one, and it describes what an HTTP request is. And it's a network message that is sent to a particular address, a URL, and in its simplest form it consists of just one or more header lines, a couple of carriage returns as the boundary to indicate that the header is finished, and then a number of body lines. And This is the type of request that is supported by the UHTTP component, and if you can bear this in mind when you're reading REST API documentation, it will give you a good insight into the parts of the API that you can use and parts that you can't. So this is about the most important thing to remember from this presentation. So there are more complicated forms of requests. There are multi-part requests, and really that is just a repeat of the simple structure. It's you have in the same request some header lines, some body lines, then a boundary, and then it's repeated with some more header lines, some more body lines, and another boundary, and so forth. Now, some REST APIs offer you the ability to pack a number of bits of information, for example, information about a file and the file contents itself, all in one request, all in one multi-part request. As I say, the UHTTP component doesn't support that type of request, so you would have to look further into the API to see how you could split that up into two separate requests for the UHTTP component. The aspects that we've added to the UHTTP component is the ability to transfer binary files or files to upload and download them. So before we already had the send request or the send operation, and now we've added file operations, operations like the load file contents, and that is an operation that you would call prior to the send to define that you're busy with a file transfer. So if you have a closer look at these operations, the standard send operation called on its own, you would specify a URL and a particular method, so a get or a put. You can specify username and password for verification at the web server. And then there are a couple of in-out parameters, the headers and the contents. And both of these are string parameters, and so Uniface expects strings to be in those parameters. They're both in-out parameters, so you fill the header parameter with the headers that you want to send, and the contents with the contents that you want to send. And once you've sent your request and the operation returns, the response headers are available in the headers parameter, and the response body is available in the contents parameter. And Uniface gives this a string interpretation, so it's not really possible to use those parameters to transfer file contents. So to transfer files, we have introduced for upload a new operation called load file contents, and you call this before the send, and this declares to the send that the body of the HTTP request that it will send is not going to come from the contents parameter, but that it should be filled with the contents of the file that was declared in the load file contents operation. Now, once you send your request to the URL, the response comes back, and again the response headers are in their headers parameter, and the contents parameter is now filled with the response from the address that you sent your request to. So often when you upload a file, a possible response in the contents parameter will be some JSON describing some aspects of the file that the vendor of the REST API has returned about the file that was uploaded. So for downloading a file, we have a similar operation, but perhaps a little less intuitively. You have to call it once before the send, and that is to declare to the send operation that you want to download a file and that it shouldn't place the response body into the contents parameter. And then you call it again after the send, and that will actually transfer the response body that was received back by the send operation into the file name specified in the dump file contents. So the file is completely transferred. In both situations, it's transferred from the operating system directory structure into the request or response and is dumped to your file system. So at no time do you actually have the file available to you during these transfers. And for that reason, we've also introduced another operation, a get info operation, that allows you to get information about the file transfer. So for example, if you're uploading a file, once you call the load file contents, you could call the get info operation to get a digest of the file contents, and that will uniquely identify the file contents, so that often when you've uploaded it, part of the response from the REST API will be a digest of the file contents that was received, and then you can compare the two to make sure that there was no corruption during the transfer. So they're the small extensions that we've added to the UHTTP component, and it did fill a lack of functionality that we needed in order to really integrate with REST APIs. So that concludes the presentation, and what I'd like to do now is to show you or do a small demonstration of how we use these operations to be able to log on to a OneDrive account and upload a file. So